My name is Henry, and I just graduated from university with a graphic design degree. While waiting to apply for jobs, I took a temporary position advertised at a local grocery store. The job was to be a security guard at a private cemetery near the town's border. I called the number on the ad and spoke to a woman. She gave me brief details. What surprised me was the pay, $30 an hour for a 10-hour shift. At this point, I needed money to live before I could land a decent job. The woman told me to be there before 7 p.m., which was when my 10-hour shift would begin. I drove to the cemetery. It was about a 25-minute drive from my house, down a narrow dirt road in a less developed, more rural part of town. The trees were dense, and it got dark very quickly here. Navigating the winding, pothole-ridden road, I approached an old, rusty gate covered in moss. I drove through the open gate, deeper into the thick woods. Darkness enveloped me. Gravestones started appearing, one by one large, tall ones, some broken and intricately carved. They were scattered across the open field that I could see from a distance. As night fell, I hate to say it, but I felt genuinely spooked. The long, winding, and windy road led me to a small shack, which the woman had instructed me not to miss. Soon, I arrived at the little shack in the middle of the cemetery. It was dimly lit with a worn-out roof. Inside, a discreet security guard had his head down on the desk. It looked like he'd been dozing for a few hours. I parked alongside what appeared to be his car. He met me outside as I got out of my vehicle. The evening air was chilly. I felt goosebumps prickle my arms and neck. I was greeted by a middle-aged guard who looked exhausted, his eyes heavy. We exchanged quick greetings as he hurried to his car. Before getting in, he turned back to me, his eyes suddenly more alert. He looked at me and asked, "Wait, you're not the new guy, are you?" I looked back, a little confused. "Tonight's my first night," I said, feeling slightly uneasy. "Damn it, all right, take this," the man replied, handing me a stack of papers from his backpack. As I took them, I noticed his hand was shaking a little. "Are you okay?" I asked. He looked at me with a wary, almost frightened expression. "Just read them and follow them. We can't afford to lose another one," he said calmly, with a slight break in his voice. "Lose another one?" I asked. "Like I said, just follow the rules and stay safe out here." The man got into his car and sped off, his tires crunching on the dirt. I stood there, taken aback, holding my backpack and the papers, then went inside the shack. The shack was lit by a low-hanging lamp. I nearly hit my head on it. There was a cramped bench, an old wooden table with an even older amateur radio beside a faded silver tray. I placed my backpack on the table and tried to get as comfortable as possible. I noticed how quiet it was. Even though my part of town had trees and wildlife, this place seemed even more isolated than I had imagined. I'd thought there would be more wildlife here, but there was nothing, just silence. Not even the sound of crickets. It was silent and cold. I couldn't see a single light in the distance. The shack was nestled in the heart of this private cemetery. The owner lived on a hill up the road. I later found out that in winter, when the trees are bare and you can see further, you can glimpse the mansion where the owner lives, and if you're lucky, you might see him looking down at the cemetery. Since it wasn't winter now, I was surrounded by darkness. The shack barely provided enough light for the immediate area around me. A few steps in any direction from the shack were unmarked, old-looking graves, all bent out of shape. As I scanned my surroundings, I almost jumped when the radio crackled to life with static and a faint voice. I was fumbling with the radio when a woman's voice came through clearly. I recognized her voice as the one I had spoken to earlier. She was patient, but not overly tolerant. Before I could reply, she said, "Read the instructions and don't deviate from them. If you don't have the papers or lose them, text me and I'll send you a picture of them. Your life could depend on it. Your shift ends in 10 hours, then you can go home. Good night," she ended as quickly as she appeared. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. 2 months' pay up front has been transferred to your bank account. My phone vibrated again, an email about a recent deposit from my bank. My eyes widened at the large sum I had just received. The job was too good to be true. As I focused on my phone, my attention was interrupted by a stone hitting the shack window. I lifted my head. Nothing but a few gravestones around me. Strange. I went back to my phone, scrolling through some emails, checking my account once or twice more. Then again, something hit the glass. I stared into the darkness around me. I couldn't see more than 10 feet in either direction. At this point, my stomach began to feel a little uneasy, and the woman's warning started to echo in my mind. Why would my life depend on it? I reflected on her warning more deeply as I stared out at the cemetery. Something caught my attention in my periphery, something running. Something moving very quickly and silently into the darkness. My heart started pounding. The darkness was playing tricks on me. That's when I looked at the papers. I picked them up with trembling hands. They were crumpled and stained brown. At the top was the cemetery's address, which I won't disclose. But below the address were rules listed, numbered 1 to 10. 1. Do not investigate any bells, no matter how close they sound. They are not bells. 2. If bugs start landing on the shack's window glass, light the candles under the desk until your shift ends. 3. If pebbles are thrown at the shack's glass, turn off the lights and hide under the desk until the laughter stops. 4. If gravestones start disappearing and reappearing, go outside and pour oil on them. The oil is under the desk. 5. If a gravedigger arrives, do not approach him. Let him come to the window. He will stare at you for a few hours but will then leave. Do not go outside when he is present. 6. Do not venture past the large angel grave under any circumstances. 7. Do not respond to anyone speaking on the radio, except for the initial call when you arrive. 8. Lock the shack every time you step outside. 9. Do not enter the restroom for more than 10 minutes. If necessary, return to the shack, wait, then go again. 10. If at any point you return to the shack and see someone else sitting inside, get in your car and drive away. I put the paper down, trying to process what was happening. Who wrote this? Why do I have to follow them? Is this a joke? As I was lost in thought, something hit the glass again. Wait a minute, I thought. I just read this. If pebbles are thrown at the shack's glass, turn off the lights and hide under the desk until the laughter stops. Damn it. I lunged for the light switch, turned it off, and dove under the desk. The shack was freezing, I could see my breath. I zipped up my hoodie and tried to keep my heart from pounding out of my chest. Another pebble hit the glass, and each time my stomach lurched. Then came the laughter, a faint, girlish giggle from outside the shack. I clamped my mouth shut, trying not to make a sound. The girl's laughter grew louder and louder until I thought it was coming from inside my own head. The pebbles were thrown harder. The girl laughed continuously for about 30 minutes. When everything became quiet, I slowly poked my head out from under the desk. Everything was silent. A thin mist hovered in the cemetery, with the bright moon illuminating the area. I saw nothing. I waited in the darkness of the shack for the rest of the night. The sun began to rise, and my nerves calmed a bit. In the morning, I could see more of the cemetery. Soon after, the same car from before pulled up. The man I had met earlier got out and asked about the papers. Before I could say anything, he looked up, his eyes dull, and said, "Lucky for you there are no morning rules." He walked away, nodded, and entered the shack, closing the door. The drive home was long, with much to think about. I got into bed and tried to sleep. My second shift would begin later that evening. Shift 2. I think I'm being watched now. I feel like they're closing in on me. Before I tell you where I am, let me tell you about my second shift at the private cemetery. After the first night, I went home and slept for about 30 minutes. So many thoughts were swirling in my mind. I knew what I had heard. It was unmistakable laughter. I'm not a big believer in the supernatural, but I knew what I had heard. I went over the list a few more times when I was home. Each time, it became crazier than the last. I looked up the cemetery online and found very little information about it. Everything about this place seemed like a mystery. As daylight faded, I barely realized I hadn't slept much since returning from my first shift, and I had already consumed 8 cups of coffee. Tonight was going to be a long night. I packed my backpack with some snacks and headed out. Just like before, the dirt road was narrow and deserted. As the sun began to set behind the trees, crows cawed and flew overhead. As I drove deeper into the woods towards the cemetery, I approached the familiar steel gate. Crows perched on the sharp spikes lining the rusted gate. As I entered the cemetery, I noticed it wasn't as quiet as the previous night. I heard something's sirens. I drove along the winding road, where my view of the shack was obscured by dozens of police cars and ambulances. I froze, immobile in my car, cold sweat dripping as I watched 2 paramedics retrieve a large black bag from beside the shack. It was the same car that had been there yesterday, except its front window was caved in, as if someone had thrown a bowling ball through it. I could only assume that red color must have been blood. The paramedics brought out what appeared to be a body bag. My mind reeled as I tried to swallow the dry lump in my throat. My heart was nearly pounding out of my chest when a nearby officer tapped his baton on my window. He motioned for me to roll it down. I didn't even realize my hands were shaking. "Sir, if you don't work here, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," the officer sternly requested. I work here. What's going on?" I stammered, wiping my hands on my pants. "Sir, there's been an accident here. Can you tell me if you know this man?" The officer handed me a photo of the morning security guard, Robert. He looked very tired in the picture, just like the night before. Again, I thought he must not have gotten enough sleep. Is he over there?" I pointed towards the body bag being loaded into the ambulance. "Yes, as I said, there was an accident. Do you happen to have any contact with him, Robert?" "I believe that was his name," the police officer asked, leaning more heavily on my car, his eyes scanning my back seat. "No, I barely spoke to him. Yesterday was my first day. He worked the morning shift while I worked the night shift," I replied, trembling, my voice slightly cracking. The officer reached into his pocket. His uniform was tight and his muscles bulged from his arm. "Why don't you take my card? We might have some more questions for you. You said you were taking his night shift, so I assume you're here in front of me now to do just that." "While I can't say exactly what happened, I suggest you be careful tonight. I've never seen anything like what happened to that guy in years. If I hadn't already peed myself, what he said nearly made me." I slipped his card into my back pocket and rolled up the window. The officer directed me to a parking spot where I parked alongside Robert's car. The bowling ball-shaped hole in the windshield faced inwards, as if something from the outside had thrown it through. The remaining glass fragments were jagged, stained red. A tow truck lifted the car away. The ambulances started to leave, and soon I was alone by the shack. The last person to leave was the officer I had spoken to earlier. He stood by the driver's side door of his car, caught my eye, and nodded slowly before getting in and driving off. Before I could collect my thoughts, my phone vibrated. Another text message came through, stating that 1 month's pay up front had been transferred to my bank account. Not long after, I received an email confirming it. I started to think I was going crazy from lack of sleep or fear. My mind began to race. Could Robert have died because he didn't follow the rules? I reluctantly grabbed my backpack and went inside the shack. Before I could even sit down, the radio crackled to life just minutes after my shift began. "Hello?" I cleared my throat, replying. "Glad to see you're back. Robert's incident was unfortunate. He was with us for 3 years," a woman replied. "I'm sure you received the bank statement we sent you." I nodded as if she could see it. "Good. Consider that payment for seeing Robert go like that. Just keep quiet and you'll receive more rewards." Then the radio abruptly cut out. Great, I thought. I have to keep quiet just because I got paid? I had to think about that. I spent the whole night wondering about Robert and what I could do with the money I now had. As I contemplated the endless possibilities of things to buy, I refreshed myself on the evening rules that were neatly laid out on the table, ready for me. 1. Do not investigate any bells, no matter how close they sound. They are not bells. 2. If bugs start landing on the shack's window glass, light the candles under the desk until your shift ends. 3. If pebbles are thrown at the shack's glass, turn off the lights and hide under the desk until the laughter stops. 4. If gravestones start disappearing and reappearing, go outside and pour oil on them. The oil is under the desk. 5. If a gravedigger arrives, do not approach him. Let him come to the window. He will stare at you for a few hours but will then leave. Do not go outside when he is present. 6. Do not venture past the large angel grave under any circumstances. 7. Do not respond to anyone speaking on the radio, except for the initial call when you arrive. 8. Lock the shack every time you step outside. 9. Do not enter the restroom for more than 10 minutes. If necessary, return to the shack, wait, then go again. 10. If at any point you return to the shack and see someone else sitting inside, get in your car and drive away. Soon, a few hours had passed, and I started to feel the effects of too little sleep. I had chugged 2 Red Bulls within the first few hours. Time seemed to stand still as the sun set. The cemetery was swallowed by darkness, and the world became silent. Soon after, I was faced with only a few gravestones I could see in front of me. I counted them, making sure I was applying rule number 4 while trying to stay awake. I was startled by the sound of the radio. It was trying to get through to me. I reached for it, then stopped. Rule number 7, I reread the list. Sure enough, number 7, do not respond to anyone speaking on the radio except for the initial call when you arrive. I held back and waited for the radio to stop. It felt like an eternity. The radio continued until a weak, raspy voice began to emerge from the static. Hello, hello, the voice came through the receiver. I fidgeted, sitting in front of the receiver. The clock struck 10 p.m. Hello, the voice came again, becoming more masculine with each hello. It sounded like an amnesiac clown who'd inhaled too much helium. My ears rang. I flinched and squeezed my eyes shut. Then silence. The radio had turned off. I kept my eyes shut for a while before opening them. I was alone. I turned away from the radio and buried my head in my hands on the table, tears welling in my eyes. Before I could spiral into fear, my bladder began to ache as I realized I really needed to urinate. This was something I hoped I wouldn't have to do, but 8 coffees throughout the day and 2 Red Bulls quickly made it an unwelcome necessity. I reluctantly sat up, zipped up my hoodie, and braced myself to go outside. The restroom was about 20 feet from the shack, right next to a massive oak tree with thick, leafy branches and large spider webs. As I stepped out of the shack, Rule 9 echoed in my head. I have 10 minutes, don't forget to lock the door. I locked the door behind me and sped towards the restroom. I reached it in seconds, slamming the plastic door shut behind me and frantically fumbling with my zipper. While I waited, I started to hear rustling outside the dark outhouse. No light except for the moonlight streaming through a hole in the roof in the corner. I started to urinate, even as the rustling grew louder. 2 minutes passed since I started. Oh, time. I finished urinating and pushed the door open. Still 7 minutes left. I ran out and headed towards the shack. I was stopped when a melodic bell rang in my ears. Ding! A bell chimed in the darkness. I checked my watch, less than 7 minutes left. I paused and looked into the pitch-black void of the cemetery. The ding sounded again, only this time closer. The dry lump in my throat returned. I felt an invisible force trying to lure me into the darkness. The ding came again. I took a step towards it. I paused, listening. Ding! A bell rang to my right. I could have sworn it was to my left a minute ago. Again, I felt a pull, drawing me closer. It felt so comforting. The bell dinged again, this time directly in front of me. I almost knocked over a gravestone that was broken in half. It was old, thickly covered in moss on its side. I bent down and felt the cold stone in my palm. I tried to read the top of it. I squinted, shining my phone's flashlight on the gravestone. It read, Robert. A sharp, searing pain shot through my body, and my mind flashed back to the scene of Robert being loaded into a body bag. The bell chimed again to my right, then again to my left, then again in front, then behind, then above me. I frantically searched around, looking for the source of the sound. That's when it hit me. I shouldn't be out for more than 10 minutes. I had been out for 8 minutes when I checked my phone. I didn't realize how far I had wandered from the outhouse. I ran back the way I came, hitting my knee on a gravestone I swore wasn't there when I first arrived. My shin ached, and I felt a warm stream of blood running down my leg. I could only see a few feet ahead through the darkness. The shack was in sight, its light shining brightly in the dark. I ran, checking my phone in my pocket. 1 minute left. Then I hit another gravestone. This one was a bit bigger. My phone flew out of my hand into the darkness. I screamed in pain. I felt a hot, electric shock of pain shoot through my body as I tumbled into the grass. With a jolt of adrenaline, I sprang up and ran towards the shack. I only had seconds left. That's when I realized I had left my phone. I stopped at the shack door, unlocked it, and looked back. I couldn't see the phone but knew I had dropped it. I couldn't risk it. I went inside and looked at my knee, a fresh, bright red gash just above my kneecap. My pants were stained red. I sat at the table and bandaged the wound as best I could. Checking my watch had become a deeply ingrained habit by then. How could I be so stupid? Why didn't I check my watch? I cursed my own foolishness. I was brought back to reality by a small tap on the glass. I froze in place. What did I just hear? Then again, tap. A pebble hit the glass. I lunged to turn off the light, and before I could dive under the desk, I caught the eye of a shadowy figure in the cemetery. It stood in the darkness, with glowing yellow eyes. I stood transfixed before the creature. Its eyes seemed to pulse erratically from the darkness. In a flash, something hit the glass, my phone. My phone was stuck in the middle of the glass, facing me, with sparks flying from it. From the darkness, an earth-shattering scream erupted. I dove under the desk as the ground spun and shook around me. It sounded like a bear was prowling outside. Then the laughter began, the laughter of little girls, coming in waves. The ground then shook like an earthquake. It felt like the entire shack was collapsing. I sat huddled, my eyes squeezed shut. The girls' laughter became more sinister and less human as the ground erupted around me. When I peeked out, there were brilliant yellow lights radiating from the darkness of the cemetery. I cowered, seeking safety, and waited. I waited and waited. Finally, I became frustrated as the yellow lights and ground tremors continued for hours. It felt like an eternity until daylight began to break. My shift was almost over, but who would come to relieve me? As the sun rose higher, I gathered enough courage to crawl out from under the desk. My legs were stiff and aching with pain. I let out a groan and winced. My phone was embedded in the glass. I couldn't pry it out. An old silver Cadillac with tinted windows pulled up. It kicked up clouds of dust. I guessed this must be the new morning guy. As I stepped out of the shack, breathing in the morning air, I noticed both of my back tires were slashed. I didn't have a spare. I had to get home. The Cadillac pulled up beside me, and a pimply-faced teenager stepped out. He was led into the shack by a tall woman with fiery red hair and dark sunglasses, without a word or a glance at me. She caught my eye and nodded slowly. Perhaps she's the one who contacted me on the radio, I thought. Too tired to care, I gathered my belongings and limped towards my car. I could see the woman talking to the teenager outside the shack. She was holding the rule book in her hand. My car started with difficulty as I carefully drove down the road on 2 flat tires. I got home with my wheel rims nearly destroyed and quickly changed the tires. I showered, cleaned my wounds, and then collapsed into bed. I woke up later in the afternoon, went about my daily tasks, and prepared for my 3rd shift. My leg was sore and aching. I wrapped it tightly and took a couple of Advil before heading to my car. My phone started to ring. "Hello," I answered. "Nothing." "Hello," I said again. "You broke some rules, didn't you, Henry?" My mind raced back to last night, all the terrifying memories flooding me. I thought I followed them. What's wrong?" I yelled. "Come to the cemetery," the woman calmly said. "I'll explain." With my backpack ready, I ran to my car and sped frantically down the road. Night had fallen much faster than usual. The streets were deserted and the air was hot. A flock of crows flew overhead like a massive school of fish. I felt a churning in my stomach. Shift 3. I should have listened earlier. Now I'm in the hospital. I lost a few fingers, and I don't think they're done with me. My last shift is tomorrow, and I'll try to update when I can. Let me tell you what happened on my 3rd shift at the private cemetery. I left home after the mysterious woman's call. I knew I had made a mistake. Who could follow all those rules while scared to death? I sped to the cemetery. My throat felt tight. The sky was dark early, windy, and cold. A storm was on the horizon. It was one of those days where silent lightning struck from the hills, illuminating the sky in streaks of light. The cemetery gate was off its hinges, swaying back and forth in the strong winds. It slammed against the iron, echoing across the field. I drove through, my leg throbbing with every slight movement. Driving down the narrow road, I almost didn't notice that the cemetery was empty. Not a single gravestone lay in the plot, just a pile of dead, dry grass. Of all the crazy things I'd seen in the past few days, this concerned me the least. When I arrived at the shack, the classic Cadillac with tinted windows was parked in front. The woman with fiery red hair and milky white skin sat, smoking a cigarette, her dark sunglasses reflecting the light. Thunder began to rumble. I stood beside her, getting my backpack. Inside was an empty water bottle. She walked halfway towards me, flicking her cigarette butt into the dry grass. "Do you know why I'm upset with you?" she asked, adjusting her sunglasses. Her head shook, indicating I hadn't followed the rules. A silent lightning bolt carved across the night sky. "Yes, Henry, and if you don't follow them, there will be consequences," she replied. I could feel my throat tighten again. But you never told me about all the crazy things happening here," I stammered. "You've been generously compensated, Henry. You didn't follow the rules, and now payments must be repaid." Her voice grew demanding. "All right, take some of the payment, but you have some explaining to do here," I nervously replied. "Not now, Henry, do you hear that?" I winced as the deafening thunder cracked. "That's for you, Henry. You've made it this far with your life. Robert didn't," she said with a twisted smile, my anxious grin reflecting in her glasses. She slowly approached me, taking something from behind her back. I cautiously backed away. Hey, stay away from me. Stepping backward, I tripped over something hard, a gravestone that had sprung up behind me, and I fell to the ground. My knee throbbed. The wind howled, making the tree branches fly. In an instant, the woman was on top of me, her knee pressing into my bleeding knee wound, making it bleed even more. Her wild red hair flew in the wind. She revealed a steel blade from behind her back with an elaborately decorated red crystal handle. The blade reflected the moonlight. Her evil grin widened as she tightened her grip on my wrist. I writhed to escape. Then she pressed her knee deeper into my wound, sending pain throughout my body. She gripped my hand and brought the blade to my fingers. A payment, Henry, don't you think? I cried out and grimaced in fear. With a cut that felt hot and wet, she sliced off 3 of my fingers, leaving only my index finger and thumb. They fell to the ground, curled and bloody. I let out a horrific scream, followed by a series of thunderclaps. "Get up," she said, licking the blood from the blade. "Your shift starts now." I stood up, dazed, holding my hand tightly in my hoodie. I was losing blood fast. The woman vanished into her Cadillac and sped off. A silent lightning bolt lit up the dark field. Instantly, I was surrounded by gravestones. I went into the shack, answering the radio. It was the woman. All she told me was to use the first aid kit under the desk, and if I left, I would be killed before reaching the gate. I poured alcohol on my cuts and tightly bandaged my hand. It felt lighter. I wanted to leave right then, knowing that whatever death I might face, whatever Robert had faced before he left us, must have been something sinister. The rain didn't come, just small thunderclaps and bright streaks of lightning. With each flash of lightning, the cemetery lit up. Sometimes there would be dozens of gravestones, sometimes 2, then none, and so on. I was startled when I realized there was a pattern to this. The thunder grew louder with each lightning strike. I almost grabbed the list and reread it. Rule 4. If gravestones start disappearing and reappearing, go outside and pour oil on them. The oil is under the desk. This is it, I thought. Pour oil on the gravestones if they start appearing and disappearing. I looked under the desk, and behind the first aid kit was an old, rusty can filled with thick black oil. I grabbed the can with my intact hand. Lightning struck again as a large gravestone appeared just inches from the shack's glass, almost knocking me over. I let out a scream when I saw it. I nervously stepped outside into the darkness, cold winds hitting my face. The gravestone must have been 8 feet tall. I was shocked by the warmth radiating from it. Trembling, I poured the can of oil onto the gravestone, not knowing what would happen. The oil frothed and spread, beginning to melt the stone like acid. Soon after, the gravestone became a molten pile on the ground. A silent lightning bolt struck, illuminating the field, revealing the normal cemetery. I ran inside, not wanting to be outside for more than 10 minutes, and waited. With each flash of lightning, the field lit up and revealed the same number of gravestones each time. I counted them very carefully. As the night wore on, boredom began to set in, and the pain in me had now become a dull, persistent ache. My lips were cracked, and my head felt like it had pins stuck in it as I tried to fight off the nausea. A bee landed on the glass in front of me. I didn't remember seeing any bugs here. Confused, I stared at it as it crawled on the glass. Then another. One by one, bees landed on the glass, hundreds of them, surrounding the glass, making the inside of the shack dark. Their buzzing grew louder. I reread the rules. Rule 2. If bugs start landing on the shack's window glass, light the candles under the desk until your shift ends. Before I could light the first candle I had, a bee squeezed through the crack where my phone had been thrown earlier. It buzzed around the room, hitting the lamp. I clutched the candle in my hand, not knowing what to do at this point. More bees poured in, the buzzing grew louder. I rushed towards the door, covering myself in my jacket as the bees swarmed in. Now they were landing on me. I frantically tried to get matches and light them with one hand, but with each swipe, I dropped the matchbox. I shooed them away in desperation, each sting feeling like a needle under my skin. Every inch of my flesh was throbbing. One lucky bee stung my left eye as I reached for the dropped matchbox. I screamed in pain and pulled the stinger out of my eye. I couldn't see anything. With the matchbox in my mouth, I struck a match and heard it ignite. I held the match to the candle, with bees crawling all over me, waiting for the candle to catch fire. I covered my eye, squinting to see if the candle was lighting up. When I saw the small, bright orange flame, I opened the shack door and fell out into the cemetery, slamming the door shut behind me. I waited by the door as the bees poured inside. My watch counted down the minutes. Not supposed to be out here for more than 10 minutes. My legs began to shake. With each passing minute, I could see the faint yellow light in the distance. With each lightning flash, that creature was waiting. Sweat streamed down my forehead as my last minute finally arrived. Then, back to the swarm of bees. Not wanting to face the creature I assumed had killed Robert, I reached for the door, closed my eyes, and slowly stepped in. The buzzing was deafening. I stood in the middle of the shack as the bees crawled over me, an occasional sting here or there. I waited for what felt like an eternity until I noticed the buzzing gradually dying down. Soon, I mustered enough courage to open my eyes. There was hardly a bee left in the shack. I stood still again and waited a few more minutes until all I heard was silence. Raindrops began to fall on the glass. The bees were gone. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing, my body aching. I looked at my hand, where my fingers used to be. I felt like I could still encounter them and noticed a bee crawling into my open wound. I frantically reached for it, groaning as it burrowed into my skin. I couldn't grasp it because it had disappeared inside me. I sat there, eyes wide, a stream of blood flowing from my finger onto the floor, my jaw agape, tears streaming down my face. I knew what I had seen, a bee was inside me. I could feel it moving slightly within me. I curled up on the floor and cried, the candle burning brightly beside me. I don't know when, but I definitely passed out after that, either from blood loss or shock from the stings. I woke up to a bright sky, the dazzling sun shining through the glass. The candle was out. My heart sank as I realized it might not have been lit for my entire shift. My head was spinning. My knee and hand were covered in dried blood. My eye felt swollen to the size of a baseball. I could barely see anything with it. I hurriedly stood up, looking around. The cemetery was empty again. Waiting for me outside was a woman with red hair. She walked over and unlocked the door. She looked at my hand, wincing as a bee flew past her, and motioned for me to come out. I cried uncontrollably as I walked towards my car. I could feel her presence watching me, or something watching me. I drove myself to the hospital. I told them about the bee, but they didn't believe me. They asked what happened to my fingers. I made up a story about my fingers getting caught in a weight machine, severing them. They looked at me cautiously. Their caution turned to confusion when I also confessed that I had been stung by a swarm of bees when leaving the gym to go to the hospital. As I sit here in my hospital bed, I know they are watching me. I can feel their presence around me. As I walk, the wounds where my fingers used to be throb. I can occasionally feel a tickle or movement somewhere in my body. I don't know if my friend is nesting somewhere inside me. The finger wound oozes a white and green glue-like foam that the nurse has to change hourly. It smells terrible, and my skin has turned greenish. As I rested in bed, I received an email on my laptop. It was from the woman. The content read, "Tomorrow's shift, your last. Come or you will pay another penalty." I half laughed, half sighed. I couldn't believe this was happening to me. I felt like I was losing my mind. I'll post again after my last shift tomorrow if I'm okay. Thank you for your support. I had to get out of the hospital before my final shift started. I waited until the nurse came to change my hand dressing. She would be back in an hour. My hand, or what was left of it, had turned greenish, and my fingertips were bruised black and constantly oozing pus. Occasionally, I felt a slight movement in my body. My mind flashed back to the swarm of bees from the other day. Trembling, trying to distract myself from the dull ache in my hand, I shuffled to the door, trying not to make too much noise. The scratch on my knee had healed more but still ached with strong movements. I tried to fight through the pain as I rushed down the hallway towards the emergency stairs. Luckily, I was on the 3rd floor. My knee was already hurting by the time I reached the bottom. Now for the hard part. Getting through the crowded lobby without anyone pointing out a crazy guy in a hospital gown with his butt exposed. I cautiously darted through the lobby, pushing myself through the revolving doors. My gown almost got caught in the middle. The evening air was crisp and cold. A cool breeze blew through my gown and gave me goosebumps. My car wasn't too far. All I had were my keys and my laptop. Fortunately, I had a change of clothes in the trunk. My shift started in 25 minutes, and the moon was brighter than ever. As I hurried to my car, I heard a call from behind. A security guard was leaning forward, calling my name, holding his pants up to keep them from falling. I got in my car, gave him a glance, and sped off towards the cemetery. My last sense of self was left behind in that hospital. I knew what I was getting into as I approached the steel gate of the cemetery, or so I thought. I barely noticed that the rusty gate had completely fallen off its hinges and lay tilted to one side, covered in debris, probably from the storm the night before. Driving down the road, gravestones began to emerge from the darkness as night began, the sunlight receding behind the dense woods. Soon, I was surrounded by darkness. A faint orange glow began to emanate from the horizon as I approached the shack. I parked my car alongside the shack. No Cadillac in sight. No one in the shack, empty and desolate. I put on my spare shorts and shirt, tossing the gown into the back seat, and took my laptop and car keys into the shack. The orange glow came from deeper within the cemetery, at the bottom of a hill. As my stomach began to sink, I waited for the radio call in the shack. I waited for 30 minutes without a call. In previous shifts, the radio would immediately turn on when I entered the shack. I started to feel something was wrong. I had been watching the gravestones, making sure to count any anomalies, but they were stable. No bugs, no pebbles, no bells. I hadn't even needed to pee yet. Strange. Everything was still while I was on high alert. As night fell, the radio started to crackle. I stared at it for a moment. Now I was in a difficult situation. I hadn't answered the radio at all since I arrived. I reread the rules, neatly laid out on the table once more. Rule number 7. Do not respond to anyone speaking on the radio, except for the initial call when you arrive. That was the problem. There had been no call when I arrived, only this call now. I cursed myself, and cold sweat started to pour. I answered the call reluctantly. "Hope you're feeling better, Henry," a woman quickly replied. "Glad to see you made it here. I need you to follow my instructions as I will only say this once, okay?" I gently cleared my throat. "Okay. I'm sure you've noticed the orange color in the distance. I need you to join us there." "But I'm not allowed to be out for more than 10 minutes, I replied, a sarcastic smile on my face. She couldn't trick me that easily. "You're smart, but Henry, if you had followed the rules more strictly in the early days, you wouldn't be in this predicament. You have 10 minutes to get here, or we'll come to you." Then the radio cut out again. I cursed myself once more. Instinctively, I slammed my bandaged hand onto the table in anger. Pain shot up my arm and tears welled. I buried my head in my hands on the table, thoughts of my family flooding my mind. Perhaps I wouldn't see them again. My bandaged hand dangled to one side as drops of blood oozed out. As I cried at the table, I barely noticed a small bee crawling out from my bandage and flying around the shack. I stared at the bee. I gathered my belongings into a drawstring bag, lit a candle, and walked through the darkness towards the orange glow, which was now growing louder. With all the strength I could muster, I stepped out into the darkness, through the gloom of the cemetery. Branches cracked around me, rustling leaves swirled. My nerves became increasingly frayed as I walked through the darkness towards the light. As I got closer, the buzzing grew louder. The ground emitted a low hum. I walked to the top of the hill, looking down. At the foot of the hill, a large fire was surrounded by people holding hands in unison. Deep crimson robes flowed past their feet. On their heads were golden, devil-like masks with 2 large, barbed horns. Their chants grew louder as the fire blazed, shifting from fluorescent orange to brilliant hot yellow with each chant. The fire seemed to dance and grow larger. I cautiously walked down the hill, careful not to twist my ankle and fall. As I got closer, the chanting stopped. The golden masks turned towards me in unison. The red-haired woman began to clap and cheer as I reached the bottom. "What do you want from me?" I cried out, the heat from the fire making my skin itch. The golden-masked men removed their robes. Each of their pale bodies was bruised and scarred. The woman approached, her long hair almost reaching her knees. She held a cigarette in her mouth as it slowly turned to ash. "Henry, we need you. You are essential for salvation," the woman said. The masked men silently began to chant again. Before I could say anything, thick hands grabbed my shoulders and waist. The men had appeared behind me, their masks reflecting the fire's light. I could barely make a sound as they pulled me towards the fire. Their strong musk stung my nose. I dug my heels into the ground, trying to escape their grasp. The chanting grew louder and louder. My screams were drowned out by their voices. The fire swayed in an orange and yellow dance as the heat began to engulf my hair and clothes. I was thrown into the fire. My life flashed before my eyes before everything went dark. I woke up in the middle of the cemetery next to a tall, elaborately decorated angel statue. She looked down at me, her hands clasped, with a large crack splitting her head. I coughed, smelling burnt ash on my skin. I looked down and realized my fingers were back. I touched and pulled and scratched. My fingers had returned somehow. I stood up, realizing I was in the cemetery. It was early morning. I looked at my watch. It had stopped. I quickly realized there was a faint, thin mist in the cemetery. There seemed to be no life, no gravestones. I sat by the angel statue for what felt like hours. As the sun rose higher, the fog began to dissipate, and I was met with the empty fields of the cemetery. My shift was over. I gathered my belongings and started walking across the field. I must have walked for hours, but the sun hadn't moved. I climbed the hills, passing the angel statue again and again, her head following me with every movement. I was incredibly confused. Even though I was walking away from the statue, I always circled back to her. I kept walking, my legs began to tire, but the cut on my knee had completely vanished. I called for help, my voice echoed across the empty field, trying to get a response. My voice was hoarse, almost broken. All I could see were dead grass fields. I didn't see the gate at all. That scared me. As I desperately walked through the cemetery, a shack appeared in the distance. With newfound energy, I trudged towards the familiar old shack. My car was nowhere to be seen. The shack looked quite clean, all the same shack, the same oak tree, the same radio. I closed the door and sat in my familiar chair, immersed in confusion and disbelief. My mind returned to the chanting people, the fire, the light. I felt the pain and heat of the fire when I was thrown in, my skin hurt, but I was okay. I sat for hours, the sun high in the sky without a single cloud. If I really squinted, I could make out a shape in the distance. I thought it must be the angel statue, but every so often, it would change position and move closer. As boredom set in, I started writing my story, still very vivid. At this point, complete bewilderment was the most concerning thing. I seemed to be alone out here, but unlike before, this place just felt like an indefinite void. Occasionally, I would catch something moving in my periphery. I would turn to look and see nothing. A sound might catch my attention but would quickly disappear. As I sat here writing my story, the radio crackled. A voice spoke, first a woman's, sounding like the red-haired woman but then transforming into a man's voice. As the voice tried to come through, I called out, pleading for help. Finally, the voice became clear. "Hello, Henry," the man said. "Yes, I'm here. For God's sake, get me out of here. What the hell is going on?" I cried, tears streaming down my face. "You have nothing to worry about, Henry. All your pain is gone," he said, his voice strangely calm, sending shivers down my spine. "Currently, Henry, you are with us. Your morning shift is going well. See you tonight." Then the radio cut out again. I sat there with the receiver in my hand, my body limp. I cried, I cursed, I screamed, I prayed, but nothing came and nothing left. Days passed endlessly, time stood still. I returned to my writing. I hope this reaches you all. I don't know how long I'll be here, when my shift will end, or if it ever will. I hope someone out there can find me. I'm going now. I'll continue to update if I can. Love you all. Goodbye, sincerely, Henry. While time seemed to stand still, the only thing that appeared to move was the angel statue in the sea of dead grass. I tried to keep busy, searching for some meaning in this barren void. My efforts went unrewarded. I hesitated to go too far from the shack, fearing it might disappear as quickly as it had appeared. However, the longer I stayed there, the closer the statue came. I didn't feel hungry, thirsty, or want to sleep in this void. Time seemed warped. What frightened me most was that the sun wasn't even hot, even though it still shone in a cloudless sky. Everything here seemed neutral. As I typed my story, I had searched the web and watched countless videos over a day. My eyes began to strain. My camera's reflection painted a terrible picture of myself. I looked 10 years older, with large dark circles under my eyes. My mind went back to my first encounter with Robert, the day shift employee, who always looked tired, like a vampire. As I recalled his initial warning that the morning shift was worse, I tried to refrain from thinking about him being pulled out in a body bag, his car window shattered with bloodstains. While waiting, I noticed a familiar figure appearing whenever I looked out at the distant grass. The angel statue in the field was closer. Was this an illusion? Was my mind playing tricks on me? I had to test it with all my anxiety. I crouched under the desk to watch videos, thinking that the more I avoided looking outside, the closer the statue might get. Then, perhaps, I could do something. Under the desk, a few candles and a rusty oil can were neatly arranged. I pushed them aside, keeping the oil can for when the statue got closer. Laptop ready, I sat down with little concept of time. I watched videos for hours again, writing and surfing the web for anything that could help me. I couldn't find anything online related to the cemetery, as if history had erased it from existence, or any notion of this place was stuck in this void with me. Under the desk, I heard the rustling of the grass again. The ground occasionally trembled, but I remained still. When I couldn't bear it any longer, I left the desk. The sun was shining brightly in the radiant sky, every ray of light. To my surprise, the angel statue was no more than 30 feet from the shack. I looked at her in amazement. Her outstretched hands seemed welcoming, but the sinister crack on her face gave me goosebumps. She had some force, as if pulling me closer to her. The closer she came, the stronger the pull. I crawled under the desk, returned to the internet, and a moment later I looked up again. The angel statue was standing firm, no more than 5 feet from the shack. I grabbed the oil can and ventured towards the statue. The field was deserted. The grass seemed taller than I remembered, almost knee-high. I moved towards her, focusing on her. The closer I got, the more comfortable and warm it felt. I looked back and the warmth was gone. The shack was no longer there. Instead, there was only dead, dry grass. My heart sank, but at this point, what did I have to lose, while my time and life were stuck here? As I turned back to the statue, now only inches from me, I almost crumbled. We faced each other. The crack spreading across her concrete face was disturbing but still inviting. Heat radiated from her. I lightly touched her arm. It grew even hotter. Soon after, the pain in my fingers began to come in waves. I looked at my newly regenerated fingers, which were now turning bluish-black. In a panic, I poured oil over her head, and just like the gravestone I had done this to before, she began to melt. I fell backward as the pain in my fingers began to intensify. The pain flowed from my fingers up to my arm. I writhed on the ground as she stood there, blocking the sun. I bit my lip, tasting metal in my mouth as the pain surged through me like an electric current. As the oil worked its magic, melting her away, the sun began to rise behind her. Soon, she was nothing but a bubbling puddle on the ground. The pain in my body slowly disappeared. I stood up, the wind began to pick up, and the pull had completely subsided. I scanned the area, and right behind me was the shack, clear as day, the large oak tree, the outhouse, and most importantly, my car. I ran towards the shack, tears streaming down my face, wiping them away. I noticed a stack of layered money neatly placed on the table. I trembled, picking up the paper. The top read, Morning Shift Rules. The lump in my throat bobbed as I read the rules aloud to myself, trembling. 1. Any visitors to the cemetery must be escorted to their graves. Do not ask any personal questions. 2. Moving gravestones must be oiled. 3. If a gravedigger appears at any point, you must find an empty coffin and hide in it until he leaves. 4. Nightwalkers will stalk you from the dark areas around the cemetery, but ignore them. Do not destroy any of their flowers. 5. Finally, if the large mausoleum on the hilltop opens, try to survive until your shift ends. Rule 5 really made me uncomfortable. The rules were etched in my mind. I read them over and over. A knock at the door almost made me wet myself. Pressed against the glass was a pimply-faced teenager, his buck teeth grinning widely as he pulled at the doorknob. I let him in, wiping tears from my face. "Geez, you look pretty tired, huh?" the pimply-faced teenager said. I chuckled to myself, a sense of déjà vu washing over me. Before I could speak, I noticed my surroundings had returned to normal, as if I had been brought back to reality. I looked at my watch, 7 p.m. The pimply-faced teenager threw his bag on the floor and started texting. Lucky for you there are no morning rules. Robert's similar thoughts returned to me. I drove along the cemetery path, speeding past gravestones as the moon rose high. I never thought I'd want to see night again so badly. Back home, I called my parents. They were horrified when I spoke to them, saying I had been missing for over a week and the police were looking for me. Before I could explain, the call was cut off. I tried calling back but couldn't get through. I tried different numbers, but to no avail. Drowsiness began to set in. I struggled to keep my eyes open. Soon after, my consciousness shut down like elevator doors, and I passed out. I woke up early that morning, no missed calls from my parents, only one call from an unknown number and a voicemail. I cautiously played the voicemail. "Hello, Henry, glad to have you back with us. Rest assured your parents are fine, but they won't be speaking to you anytime soon. You'll have to return to the cemetery at 5 a.m. I assume you have the rules with you. Oh, Henry, don't try to call for help. You are currently our property, and we are watching you very closely." The man's voice cut off. I ran to get dressed, gathering my belongings. I noticed a shiny silver Cadillac parked across the street with dark tinted windows. As I got in my car and drove to the cemetery, I noticed the Cadillac became less distinct. I pulled onto the cemetery road and prepared for my second shift. The sun began to rise above the trees as I prepared for my morning shift. The lump in my palm kept twitching in waves. It felt soft to the touch, as if it were a very old, still cold burn. My mind replayed the scene where the gold-masked man pushed me into the fire. I quickly pulled myself back to reality, then gathered my things and headed straight to the cemetery. Once again, it was like this. On the way there, Cadillacs seemed to be stuck on every corner. I couldn't shake the feeling they were watching me. Sunbeams shone over the treetops. It looked like it would be a clear day. Driving along the winding cemetery road, I had a better view of this cemetery in daylight. It looked almost peaceful. Waiting for me in the shack was a pimply-faced teenager. He had his head down on the table when I pulled the shack door open. He almost jumped out of his seat. It looked like he had been trembling beforehand. Meeting each other through the door, we glanced at each other as if we both knew the crazy stuff that had happened to us, yet here we were still standing. "You look tired. Is everything okay?" he said, his voice cracking up an octave or two. "Just a few long days," I replied, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "How about your evening?" He looked around, his face full of anxiety. "Well, if I'm being honest, it sounds kind of weird, you know? A gravestone suddenly appeared around me, so I poured oil on it. Then the gravestones started melting. Sounds cool, but I was a little scared. Then a few more gravestones appeared, so I did the same to them." "You weren't out there for more than 10 minutes, were you?" I interrupted with a serious tone, one eyebrow raised like a professional veterinarian. "No, I was quick, but when I came back to the shack, I passed an angel statue with a crack running down her face. Her face was drooped. It felt strange to me because I'd never seen a gravestone like that before, so I rechecked the rules, and I saw a rule that said not to venture past her, but I didn't look at her when I passed." He tried to explain, looking around. "Did anything else happen?" I asked, a feeling of dread beginning to creep in. "No, nothing else happened, but I started to get an itch on my arm like a rash." He pulled up his sleeve. A red, scaly rash the size of my hand was raised on his arm. "It's really starting to bother me. Maybe I should get some cream for it. It's really strange." "You should be careful with that statue. She's not as simple as she seems," I warned him. "I understand. You try to be safe out there, okay?" he replied. "I will, you too." I nodded, watching him stride down the winding dirt road. As I sat there collecting myself, I reviewed the daytime rules I had put in my pocket earlier. 1. Any visitors to the cemetery must be escorted to their graves. Do not ask any personal questions. 2. Moving gravestones must be oiled. 3. If a gravedigger appears at any point, you must find an empty coffin and hide in it until he leaves. 4. Nightwalkers will stalk you from the dark areas around the cemetery, but ignore them. Do not destroy any of their flowers. 5. Finally, if the large mausoleum on the hilltop opens, try to survive until your shift ends. It sounded simple, but I knew for sure what the consequences of not following these rules were. As I was going over the rules, the buzzing of my phone interrupted my concentration. It was a bank statement, 2 weeks' pay upfront deposited into my account. While I pondered the money, today had only just begun. As usual, the shift started slowly. I counted every gravestone I saw. This was much easier during the day. I could see the cemetery scenery quite well during the day, seeing the hills, the landscape seemingly enclosed by trees, bushes, and countless other plants. I scanned the horizon, still making sure to frequently reiterate the rules in my head. Around the middle of the shift, as boredom stretched over me, something caught my attention. On a hill, a figure began to take shape. My vision was limited by the sharp, dazzling light of day. It was hard to make out. Something that looked like a man was approaching the shack. This man looked complex. He limped, dragging a rusty old shovel behind him. His scraggly gray beard hung on his face, along with a straw hat and dusty blue overalls. His odd gait raised red flags in my mind. I reread the rules. It was item number 3. If a gravedigger appears at any point, you must find an empty coffin and hide in it until he leaves. Great, now I have to find an empty coffin and hide in it before the guy gets closer to me. I packed my belongings and stepped out into the cemetery, feeling nervous. Fresh air filled my lungs. The gravedigger was already close. His wide, white eyes followed me like a predator stalking its prey. Those eyes, without pupils, gave me a feeling of disgust, something inhuman. I started to run quickly into the cemetery. The gravedigger moved in every direction I went. He matched my pace. I kept running, desperately searching for a gravestone with an empty coffin, something I had never seen in this cemetery. He ran at full speed, chasing me with guttural growls and horse scratches like a wild beast, dragging the old, rusty shovel clattering against the gravestones behind him. At this point, sweat poured down my face. I could feel his breath on my neck. He was slowly eclipsing me, his shadow blocking out the sun's rays. I scrambled down the hill, his long, sharp fingernails clawed at my back. I cried out, but that blow disoriented my path, and he also veered off course. I twisted my ankle and tumbled down the hill, rolling and crashing into countless bushes. While I was trying to regain control, my heart still pounding, the gravedigger was making his way down the hill. I stood up, looking around. I saw a large mound of dirt piled next to a grave. A light bulb went off in my mind. I approached the empty grave. In front of me was the open pit. Behind me, the gravedigger wasn't too far, but he was rapidly approaching. I looked down into the grave, nearly 2 meters below the ground. There was a wooden coffin there. I took a deep breath in the hot air, trying to control my breathing as the gravedigger shuffled closer. I jumped down, lifted the coffin lid. A putrid stench erupted, nearly making me vomit my breakfast. The smell stung my nostrils, bringing tears to my eyes. I jumped into the coffin, full of dirt and debris. I closed the lid, surrounded by the stench, and plunged into thick darkness. I prayed this would work. As he began to approach, he stood next to the grave, huffing and puffing, occasionally letting out a guttural growl from his throat. As I lay there, feeling like time was endless, I felt a few grains of dirt fall onto the coffin. The gravedigger was burying me alive. I felt weight pressing down on the coffin. The coffin creaked with each shovel of dirt that was piled on. The gravedigger's groans were gradually being drowned out. I struggled in the cramped coffin, gasping for breath, screaming. Soon, the world became silent. The shoveling had stopped. All that was left was me and the darkness in the suffocating coffin. I wondered how long I could stay here while fighting to prevent a panic attack. I looked at my watch. 4 hours left until my shift ended. The coffin lid was heavy and didn't budge an inch. I tried to regain my composure. The awareness of time had vanished, but the suffocating feeling didn't completely disappear. Like a blessing, in the last minutes before my shift ended, I needed to move. I gently pushed the coffin lid, which had previously been immovable. Now it moved more easily. My back ached from the gravedigger's scratches. I tried to push the lid harder, hoping the dirt would spill into the coffin. When no more dirt came up, I pushed the lid higher, and it sprang open instantly. The grave was empty again. I stood there, confused. A full moon hung directly overhead, signaling the arrival of night. I lifted myself out of the cold grave, searching for the gravedigger's silhouette. Nothing. I quickly returned to the shack, running past his rusty shovel stuck in his pile of dirt. Following that, I emerged from the darkness to meet the pimply-faced teenager waiting in front of the shack. He looked at me, covered in mud, and asked what had happened. Before I could answer, the radio in the shack turned itself off. We looked at each other seriously. He took one last drag and went to answer the radio. I patted him on the back a couple of times before getting in my car and driving home. My ankle was swollen. My back was covered in dry, scabbed blood. Back home, I showered away the dried blood and mud with deep thoughts about my life. How long could I keep this up before something terrible happened? Something terrible like Robert's fate. I thought a lot that night, planning what might work. My mind heavy after a long day, I slept straight until morning. I woke up that morning having the best sleep I'd had in weeks. I looked at my alarm clock, let out a long yawn, a few more minutes in bed, and then I'd head out. When it was time, I gathered my belongings and went to my car. The forecast predicted cloudy weather with fog. I brought an umbrella just in case. On the way to the cemetery, the usual Cadillac tried to follow discreetly, doing a pathetic job of it. It could follow me as much as it wanted. It didn't bother me. Anyway, I wasn't planning on staying here much longer with the money I had earned. A change of scenery was what I needed. The hardest part now was to endure until I left. I drove along the shack. The pimply-faced teenager was staring blankly out at the cemetery. I cautiously approached him. I even tapped on the glass to get his attention. Nothing. I went to the door, he had locked himself in. I knocked on the door, pushed at the doorknob, but he didn't move, sitting still as a statue. When I couldn't get a response from him, I cautiously walked in front of him, through the glass. He sat there, eyes wide, staring out at the cemetery, not blinking. His eyes were red and watery, his pupils dilated. I waved my hand and tried to get his attention, but to no avail. When I couldn't get a response, I looked around and noticed a few pebbles around the shack. I picked one up and threw it at the glass. What I heard was the most horrific scream I had ever heard from a human being. The teenager snapped back to reality with ear-splitting screams, as if I had just shot him. He looked directly at me in horror, his face contorted by his screams. He became frantic, running around the small shack, knocking things over inside. I tried to help, but he burst through the door and ran down the narrow, windy road out of the cemetery. That made me very uneasy, especially with my morning going so well. I sat in the shack and reread the rules. 1. Any visitors to the cemetery must be escorted to their graves. Do not ask any personal questions. 2. Moving gravestones must be oiled. 3. If a gravedigger appears at any point, you must find an empty coffin and hide in it until he leaves. 4. Nightwalkers will stalk you from the dark areas around the cemetery, but ignore them. Do not destroy any of their flowers. 5. Finally, if the large mausoleum on the hilltop opens, try to survive until your shift ends. Time passed. I prayed that no gravedigger would visit again. I didn't think I could spend another second lying in a coffin. I had been reading some things online, watching some videos to try and keep calm. I reread the rules again and again, feeling more confident that I would be okay. The cloudy day turned pitch black with thick rolling clouds obscuring the sun. Air pressure increased from within the cemetery, and the smell of rain hung in the air. As gloom enveloped the land, I noticed a shape emerge from behind the oak tree next to the outhouse. A shadowy figure stood peering from behind the tree. It had bright yellow eyes and rough, steel-gray skin. I stared at it, watching it stand silently. It watched me from across the tree. I asked myself if it had always been there. I looked through the rules. Number 4 caught my eye. Nightwalkers will stalk you from the dark areas around the cemetery, but ignore them. Do not destroy any of their flowers. Great, I thought, looking back at the tree, but it was gone. I returned to reading, but my eyes kept darting up, waiting to see if anything called a nightwalker would appear. When I looked up for the third time in 5 minutes, I noticed a strange, circular gravestone protruding from the ground, not too far from my car. I could have sworn it wasn't there initially, as I had never seen a circular gravestone before. I got the oil can ready and went outside. A cool breeze blew through the gray clouds that filled the sky. I approached the gravestone. Strangely, there were no markings on it, and it felt very cold to the touch. The other stones were always warm, but this one was almost freezing. I hesitated, thinking this might not be random. I cursed myself for not paying better attention, then finally decided to pour oil on it. While I pondered what could go wrong, I was faced with a much different reality. Oil had been poured on the gravestone. Its beginning to melt filled me with relief. I continued to observe. Then I heard a sound like running footsteps coming from within the cemetery. When I looked up, the cemetery was empty. Trees and leaves rustled in the wind. I turned back to the gravestone, which was now almost completely melted. Before I turned back inside the shack, a shape from within the oil caught my attention. As it continued to melt, a flower began to form from inside the cracked gravestone. Confused, I looked down in horror as more flowers emerged. The stomping sound returned. The flower writhed out of the oil. Death was taking hold of it. It changed from fresh green and white to weak, brown and black, writhing in pain as the oil frothed around it. The stomping grew louder. The ground shook around me. I rushed towards the shack and was faced with a charging mob. They ran on all fours, mouths agape, with bright yellow eyes. Their long, slender limbs splayed out as they ran towards the shack. I looked through the rules, finding no way to combat them. In a desperate attempt as they closed in, I got in my car and sped down the dirt road. Perhaps retirement had come sooner than expected. As I sped along the dirt road, I looked back in my rearview mirror and saw a mob screaming towards me. There must have been more than 20 of them. Panic surged through me. Dust filled the air as they got closer. Their galloping shook the ground, creating vibrating waves that rattled my car. My heart pounded. I prayed I would escape. My mind went back to Robert's car and what had happened to him. With the iron gate in front, obscured from view of the cemetery, I pressed the gas pedal, accelerating as fast as I could. I looked back one last time and saw the mob stopping in the road, staring at something. When I turned back, the woman with long, fiery red hair stood proudly at the gate entrance. I slammed on the brakes, producing a screech that echoed in the air, and the car struggled to stay straight. My car lost control, flipped over before hitting the iron gate. I awoke in the mangled car, covered in shattered glass and deployed airbags. My ears rang, and my nostrils burned from thick smoke. I was upside down, trying to undo my seatbelt, blood flowing into my eyes, obscuring my vision. Before I passed out, the woman in red leaned into the car, shaking her head in disapproval before the world went dark. I woke up in my room. It was nighttime. Was it a dream? I asked myself. I tried to go out, but I was locked in. This didn't feel like my room. Outside was pitch black and the windows couldn't be budged. This was an identical replica of my room. It felt like another world. My body was wrapped in bandages and my shoulder ached. My mind went back to the car accident. It felt too real. Now I'm sitting in this fake room, typing. I don't know how long I'll be here. It's been a few hours and nothing has happened yet. I hope this reaches you all. I'll update when I can. The night stretched on. Nothing seemed to move as I stared out the window. The room smelled of cheap plastic. This was like a cheap version of my room. I was afraid they knew too much about my life. As I thought about where my life had gone, my mind went back to the blank, hellish faces of the nightwalkers. A faint buzzing emanated from the walls around my room. I pressed my ear to the wall, feeling a tickle all over my body. As I pressed harder against the wall, I caught a faint talking sound. The TV in my room flickered. The loud sound of static startled me. I turned towards the TV. It illuminated the dark room with a pale blue fluorescent light. As the TV caught a signal, a woman appeared on the screen. "Well, Henry, you made it this far." "I must say I'm a little impressed," the woman said, taking a long drag from her cigarette. "Can you hear me?" I asked. The woman leaned closer to the camera. "Yes, we can, Henry. Let me tell you, you've brought us a lot of amusement, but your time with us is almost up. You have two choices, Henry. We can't let you leave with what you know, so I'll give you two choices." To continue, the anxious tickle in my throat began to build. Choice 1, I'm sure you're very familiar with what we call the void. You've been there for a while, about a week in Earth time. My mind flooded with images of the vast, withered grass fields I had aimlessly walked through. "Yes," I replied. "Good, that's choice 1. You'll be sent there. You won't age and you won't die. Essentially, I'm offering you immortality. Think of it as being behind a pane of glass, looking into reality. Time passes differently when you're there." My mind was spinning. "And what about choice 2? "Choice 2 is for you to join us, Henry. You've been our longest-serving security guard so far. You've seen some pretty amazing things in our little cemetery. We need someone to oversee the new livestock." "Livestock? What do you mean, livestock?" I asked, leaning into the screen. We were almost face to face. "We need people like you, Henry, to join us or to feed us. The higher beings need to be fed. That's what keeps this world running." The woman stretched her cigarette until it became a small pile of ash. "I don't know. Why would I want to join you?" I blurted out. "You don't have to. You have another choice," the woman scoffed. "No way. You just said I'd become livestock for you and be eaten," I screamed. The woman stood up from her chair and left the camera, leaving an empty room. I stood in the room, disheveled, my mind heavy. The lights in the room came on, blinding me. A voice from somewhere in the room echoed, "Choose, Henry. You have two choices." The woman's voice screamed. "I don't know." I collapsed to the floor, crying. The lights grew brighter and brighter. Thoughts of my family and old life flooded me. "Choose, Henry, or we'll decide for you," the woman roared. I tried to understand what was happening. Maybe I could find a way to destroy them, but I would need to join them. "We're waiting for you," the woman said. Okay, I've decided. I'll join you whatever the hell you are," I said. "Good, await further instructions and someone will be with you shortly. I advise you to stay in your new room," the speaker blared. I fell onto the bed, tears streaming down my face as my mind reeled. I couldn't go back to the void. I'd lose my mind there. Maybe there's a way for me to understand more about this, but I need to be in this reality to do that. As I lay on the bed and let my thoughts consume me, I slept soundly until I was awakened by the chirping of birds. I looked out the window, seeing bright rays of sun peeking from the horizon. Except I wasn't looking out my apartment window. I was looking out at the cemetery, where gravestones were scattered across a field of tall grass. I panicked, recoiling, screaming in hopes that the woman would answer. Why am I back here? What's going on? I cried. The room turned bright white again, blinding me. As I fell to the floor, I tried to fight off the hot white light. Then nothing. Like an instant flash, I opened my eyes and was met with the dazzling metal of my crashed car. I tried to stand up, but my body ached, blood flowing down my forehead. My car was in a mangled mess. I staggered to my feet, using the car as support. The glass cracked as I tried to steady myself. The sun was high, but there was still a pleasant, neutral temperature. I looked around as panic and fear took hold of my body. Before me was an empty field with soft, withered yellow grass growing everywhere. I walked forward, almost falling as I tried to keep my balance. I turned back to grab my car, and it was gone. In its place was withered grass. My mind was heavy, tears streamed down my face. I walked aimlessly. It felt like the sun never moved. Eventually, I stumbled upon a low shack hidden in the distance. My mind was hazy as I pushed myself forward. After a while, I reached the familiar shack. I went inside, and on the table was a small television screen. Curious, I turned it on, and it broadcast what looked like a live feed from a camera. The camera showed a night scene opposite the shack, but it wasn't me in the shack. I knew who was sitting there, a pimply-faced teenager, looking terrified, staring into the darkness of the cemetery. I watched aimlessly, tracking his every move. I tried fiddling with the buttons. They were lined up, 10 buttons of various colors. I pressed the yellow button and stared at the screen. Tap! Something hit the glass on the shack in the screen. The teenager flinched, lifted his head, anxiously looking around. What the hell? I pressed the yellow button again. Another tap, and a small pebble hit the glass. The teenager dove under the desk, fumbling for something. I pressed the button again and again, each time with a slight thrill. Then the continuous tapping came, more and more pebbles hitting the glass. He let out a desperate scream. He struggled under the desk, sitting there in the darkness. Clever Henry. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the power I now wielded before me. I let the teenager relax, let him think he had beaten it this time. And then I simultaneously pressed the yellow, blue, red, and green buttons. As I comfortably sat there, chuckling to myself, the horror of the cemetery descended upon the teenager. His terrified screams erupted through the small TV speaker. I watched his death and saw the red-haired woman emerge from the darkness. She looked directly at the camera from a distance, winked, and walked away to retrieve his body. The sun was high that day, like every day. It was hard to define a day here because there was no night. During my time here, I had watched countless new security guards arrive. It was interesting trying to find new ways to play with them, to scare them, to see if they could follow all the rules. Death after death, they came and went. Right now, I'm watching a girl. She's made it quite far in this little game. She's almost reached where I did. I hate to say it, but I feel proud of her.